Aloha, my name is Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is breaking out of your comfort zone, and I'm pleased to introduce Patrick Riccards, author of Dad and a Cheerbo. Patrick's here today to share insights on how you can overcome any challenge and obstacle with the right attitude and tips from his book. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, to kick us off, can you give us a little background on your professional journey and what sparked your passion for, I guess, or decision to write this book?
Sure. No, always happy to talk about the story. It's one of those. I've spent most of my life working at this sort of intersection between research and communications and community engagement. I'm one of those. I started off working on Capitol Hill, worked as a consultant, and have spent most of the last 15 years or so leading national nonprofit organizations. All of that obviously has nothing at all to do with the book, but the subject of the book has been enormously helpful in addressing all of those challenges one has, particularly leading a nonprofit. And really, where this came about is, I'm incredibly fortunate. I have two terrific kids, and my youngest, my daughter, she turned 17 in September, so she's graduating high school this year. But this is really the story of the two of us. And it was one of those things when she was much younger, when she was in elementary school, she had decided that she really wanted to do cheerleading because that's what many of her friends in New Jersey were doing. And she did it for 2 years and was trying to decide whether she wanted to return or not. And unbeknownst to me, struck a deal with her coach at the time that she would return as long as her dad got to coach. And so I then spent 4 years coaching my daughter and 19 or so other tweens and then teens as they did 4 years of competition cheerleading.
Wow. And are you flexible?
No, I knew nothing. It was one of those things, and I have to laugh when I look at it in hindsight. It was for me, what I knew about cheerleading was pretty much summed up in friends of mine in high school who were cheerleaders and having watched the movie Bring It On.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, love the movie. It's a great movie. And those first 2 years, I would go watch my daughter. But you're watching 7, 8-year-olds cheerleading on the sidelines of a football game or doing a competition. You don't know what's good or not. You're just sitting there watching your own child and hoping she does a great job. And so when I took this on, there was no way I could say no. It meant so much to her. And so it required me to go out and have to learn all of this stuff. Have to learn the vocabulary, have to learn the actions that go with the vocabulary, having to learn how to interact with 19 tween girls, and how to bring it all together in a way that was going to be meaningful. And I very quickly realized, because I had no background, because I had very little understanding, that if I were going to coach this team, one of the things that I had to do is I had to be willing to do everything I asked my girls to do. And so that meant that, by the end of it, I could never tumble. I'm not quite physically built for that. I look like I should be on a football field, not on a cheer mat. But in terms of the moves, in terms of the dance, in terms of the stunting, I could fill in when I needed to for some of the positions.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, I think it's, and it's similar to how a lot of us feel just in our everyday business lives. We start a new job in an organization and you have to learn all the new lingo and you have to, that's what a good leader does is kind of lead from example.
They do, and I mean, it is. I mean, particularly when we think about it in the workforce, I think this is especially true of women. Is you adopt this notion of fake it till you make it. I say women because most guys we seem to believe we know it all from the start, and so there's nothing we have to fake. We're already experts, even if we've never seen it before. Uh, and here it just clearly wasn't the case. And it was one of those. I learned very early on. It was in my work, I tended to be one of the devil's advocates. I was the one you always planned for the worst case scenario. And as a result, you were always prepared for whatever the world was going to throw at you. With my athletes, I had to be the opposite. I had to be Mr. Positive. I could no longer be Eeyore. And, but also learned that, when I first got started, I would tell these young women, I would look to praise them. I would look to highlight the things they were doing right, but I wasn't specific. And you very quickly learned how important it wasn't a matter of just hearing "Atta girl." They needed to know specifically what it was you were referring to, what it was worked, or what it is that you want them to work on. And those are skills that translate so well into the workplace because I think far too often, we're unwilling or unable to give constructive criticism or even to give constructive feedback in general, positive or negative. And it helped me realize just how important that is to bringing together a highly functioning team.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. So what is one of your favorite stories from the book that you can share with us?
Well, I mean, there are so many. Yeah, there is there's one that breaks my heart where, literally I made my daughter cry at practice. Where you go through all of the how to coach, you go through the trainings for coach, and they tell you, oh, make an example of your own child. It's easier to deal with that. And I had prepped my daughter that at one point I was going to do that, and I did it, and I made her cry, and that was 6 years ago, and I still feel horrible about that to this day. But I think one of the moments I'm most proud of is this was my second year of coaching and we started off very strong out of the gate, and we won Central Jersey, which is the 2 steps away from getting to nationals. And so, as a result of winning Central Jersey, we were able to secure a bid to globals, which is a relatively new happening. When we went on to regionals, we didn't do as well. We came in third place. We didn't make it to nationals, and we thought the season was over. And, my girls came together at Christmas time and wanted to know if that bid we got to globals was still available. It was. And so they decided to come together over the course of about 4 weeks after having been off the mat for more than a month. And they were determined they were going to compete at globals. They were going to do a good job. And if that's where the story ended, that would have been a great enough story. But what ended up happening, we were fortunate in that globals was in Atlantic City. We lived in New Jersey. So you're talking about it was a 2-hour drive for us. So there's no travel or anything like that. And so the week of globals, um, probably our best all around athlete was warming up before practice. It was literally Tuesday. Globals was on Saturday. So she's warming up. And in warming up, she completely blows out her knee.
Oh, oh no.
To the point I'm having to help carry her downstairs, and we're trying to get her into her mother's car so they can go to the hospital to see what's wrong. And after getting her out of the building, I go back up to the gym, and my athletes look like death warmed over. They're just sitting there saying, "There's no way we can possibly do this. We can't do this without her. It's over. We just need to quit." And we came together that night and decided, no, we're not going to quit. We're gonna keep practicing, see what we can do. Had to change everything. Had to find somebody to step in. Had to change the routine so it was something that she could do properly. And we had one more day to practice. We came in on Thursday night. We did it. We weren't very good. What the heck? At this point, let's go to globals. Let's enjoy the experience, right? So we get down to Atlantic City. We're at globals. And the way every cheer competition works is that there's a process where, you've got warm-ups before you ever perform. And so, you'll have warm up, on one warm up mat, you're stretching. On another one, you can work on your tumbling. And that the last part of warm up is you actually do a walkthrough of your routine, and you're only given 3 minutes to do it. We get out there, we're getting ready to do the full routine, and we are a hot mess. Nothing goes right. Usually 3 minutes goes by like that. You want to do it again. You don't have time. We were about a minute and a half, nothing stuck.
Oh gosh.
And I finally said, okay, that's it. We're done. We're ready. You guys are ready. Just go out there, do your thing. You're going to be fine. And the girls went out and delivered the best performance I have ever seen them do. Even down our star athlete, we ended up taking second place at globals for a team that didn't even make it to nationals.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, these young women really came together and demonstrated. And for them, it wasn't that they were after the trophy; they weren't after a ring. They wanted to prove to themselves that all the work they put in that year had paid off, that they were worthy of the bid that they received. And I will still maintain that they should have taken first place, but there was no way they would have gotten first place when they never even went to nationals. The cheer is a subjective sport; is about as subjective as they come. But they won that competition in my eyes.
Wow, that's a really cool. So, why did you decide to write this book?
Um, it was one of those during the I find, first of all, I find writing cathartic. It just helps me in life. And usually my writing is work focused. And as I was experiencing this, I would come across folks that would they would hear parts of the story and would want to hear more. And as is typical for what we do, they say, "Oh, you really should write a book about this." And I had no intention of writing a book. Even, the third year, we did make it to nationals, which is every cheerleader's dream. You go to at the time, nationals were down at Disney World. Every cheerleader, every at least Pop Warner cheerleader across the country, their motto every fall is that they want to get to Disney. We got to Disney. It fulfilled all of my athletes. That was the one thing they wanted to do before they aged out. They did it. And so we started the fourth season during COVID and didn't know if we were ever going to have a season or not.
Mm.
And as we were working through, I was working through my own emotions. I never thought that being a cheer coach would be such an integral part of my DNA. And so, not being able to spend all that time with my athletes, with the rest of the coaching staff, not going to competitions, not doing all that, that was tough for me too. And, I just started writing and started telling the story. And, it was one of those, when people hear it, they become absolutely fascinated by it because, there are things you just don't expect. I mean, it's we know that there's a great deal of sexism in this country. I didn't expect to be on the receiving end of that. I didn't expect to be at competitions and have competing coaches come up to me and let me know that at one point a guy wanted to help them coach and they told him no, and that they took great pride in that.
Mm.
I never expected that I would become a bit of a spectacle in that, and I went all in. Like when we were at Disney, when we were at Globals, when I coach, I'm wearing an orange fedora with a cheer bow attached to the sides because I can't get a hair bow to stay in my bald head. Uh, I had a black and orange feather boa that I always wore. I had an orange tutu that I wore to every competition. And so, yeah, when we were at nationals, you would have people that would stop, other teams wanting to stop to take a picture because I looked like a mascot, not a coach. But it was, there's still that one moment. I remember being at one of our competitions, and one of my athletes, just a dear, dear young woman, little tiny thing, and she was walking the halls of the competition, which is often what happens after you're done, and she heard some mothers from another team complaining about me and how I had no business being there. And this young woman came up to me to tell me what she just heard. And all 4'7" of her asking if I want her to take care of it for me. It's just a story that has to be told.
And what were your actions? Like, what did you say?
Oh, there, I told her absolutely not. I said, I appreciated it, and the love that she always showed me, that all of them showed me over the years, was so great. I told her, I said, no, I said, McKenna, all you have to do, go out there and win. Go out there, do your best, enjoy yourself, and win. Don't worry about the other stuff. And that's what she did.
Um, that's really cool. So, little segue. So you said that you're in nonprofit. Which nonprofits do you represent?
So I run a nonprofit called the Driving Force Institute. And this is a nonprofit that I actually founded 5 years ago. And the thinking behind this is, we live in a world, unfortunately, where we simply don't know our history. And young people in particular find history to be both boring and irrelevant. And so what we do is we produce short films, usually 2.5 minutes long, on the unknown moments in American history, the people, the places, the artifacts, the events that so many young people don't know about, they never read about in their classroom textbooks, but are the sorts of things that they will find interesting, that they will find provocative, that they will find relevant to their own lives. And so we've now produced about 700 short films.
Wow,
We have about 60 million users around the globe.
that's amazing. And how do you find this content? What is your stream of source?
It's it is in large part due to the incredible work that teachers do today. We realized from the very beginning how closely we had to work with educators. And so when you reach out to teachers and ask them, what are those stories they share in the classroom that resonate with their kids, and particularly high schoolers? What are those ideas when they share them get learners to go down rabbit holes and want to understand what else they haven't been taught that is interesting. And so we get a lot of that from educators. We work with a lot of partner organizations, folks like New York Historical Society and the Smithsonian and the White House Historical Association. They have stories that they want to make sure that young people are understanding. So it comes from the field. It's people who sharing with us what they found so important and what they believe others should know as well.
It's really interesting. So my daughter, she's 10 and a half, and she's in fifth grade. And she's going to be going to a private school, girls' school next year. So I'm really excited about that. But, one of the things her teacher's doing is every morning they watch CNN 10, which she really likes, and I thought that was cool to kind of get an idea what's happening in the world. But I'm interested. This sounds like something that is it part of people's curriculum? Like how do teachers find out about this
Well,
content?
it is. I mean, everything we produce is open source, so it is available for free because we just want to make sure. I did a national survey a couple years ago just to get a sense of what Americans knew about history. We used sample questions from the citizenship tests, and you found that fewer than 3 in 10 under the age of 45 could get 12 of 20 questions correct.
Wow.
It becomes so important, and we want to make sure it is getting into the hands of those who actually need it. And one of the challenges you have, particularly in public education today, is so much of this. We know that young people are spending their time online. One of the reasons why we went to video instead of doing other forms of informing was that right before COVID, there was a data set that I saw that the average 16-year-old was spending about 2 hours a day watching YouTube and TikTok. And in those 2 hours, they were watching 63 unique segments, which is why we keep it at 2 minutes as well. And so the biggest issue becomes how do you get it past the firewalls? And so that's why we partner with some incredible distribution partners that already have relationships with the schools. And so the way this is intended is we want educators to be able to use sort of 2 or 3 films at the same time. You take that first 6, 7 minutes of class to let the students watch it. And then the rest of the class is meant to probe. It's meant to discuss. This is not about how many facts and figures can one memorize so they can do well on the local quiz bowl team down at the local restaurant or something. It's not what we're trying to do. It's really to get people to think critically and to get them to explore a lot of this. And so, with that, it's providing guides to teachers. How do you teach certain things? How do you teach controversial topics? How do you teach? We've done them. And sort of how do you go about teaching something like Memorial Day? This month, how do you teach Black History Month? There are all sorts of stories, and unfortunately, if you look at the traditional high school classroom, which is the only place where we're usually required to teach American history, what's common about Black History Month? Everybody learns about Martin Luther King. Everybody learns about Frederick Douglass. There's far more to our nation than that. And that's what a lot of these films seek to do, is make sure that we're telling all of those stories that are far more interesting than all of the dead white male landowners that had been in the textbooks since I was a kid many years ago.
Wow. That's really interesting. And so in terms of marketing your product, how are you is it you're using traditional distribution, you're using others to leverage it? What else?
We do. It's a great question. And it's one of those, when we first started off, I had this grand vision that we were going to create just some incredible content and high schoolers were going to share it. And we produced some incredible content, and I focus grouped it with high schoolers who told us, love this film. And also told us there was no way in the world they were ever going to go on social and start saying, check out the great history video I just watched. Never going to happen. So we had to pivot. Yeah, it shouldn't have been a surprise. I mean, I am all for learning from our mistakes and learning from failure. And that was one of those failures I had to learn from. And the first thing we did was we realized that while we were producing films for the average 16-year-old, we've since, because we produced a full series of 50 films for the state of Florida around their standards and that sort of stuff. So that required us to go as young as kindergarten. But originally, focusing on high schoolers, content for high schoolers, but content that the educators were going to embrace and use. And I started talking to teachers who were like, yeah, we want to use film. And the only way we can do that is I go and I take episodes of Drunken History and I have to figure out how to edit out the bad language and edit out the alcohol. And then I use that in class. Well, they don't have to do that anymore. And our distributors are the ones, like I said, they have relationships in all of these school districts. They're getting the content in there. And so now what we're focusing on, in addition to producing films, is creating professional development for teachers. We piloted a program a couple years ago on helping teachers understand how to use multimedia in the classroom, because it's something that unfortunately most teachers don't learn when they're getting their degrees. And so, figure out how to do that. And now we're creating some specific content around some of those key issues that they're going to have to teach, and how to make it interesting, relevant, how to make it come alive for today's learners.
Well, that's really interesting, and it makes me think about when, when COVID first happened, my daughter was in kindergarten. I think she was just getting out of kindergarten, maybe first grade, and she was going to Waldorf, which was a Montessori school here, and because of their vision of not really being focused on technology, and that was kind of the anti what they were doing. They wanted to finger knit and make puppets and all wonderful things that I really support. But as a result, they really had a big struggle with adopting a digital framework. And I think that you're right that it's kind of similar to when I went to school. There wasn't digital advertising, and I had to learn those things myself. But it's nice that you're, creating a platform where it is accessible and easy.
Well, I think it also speaks to how important it is. And it doesn't matter if you're writing a book, you're producing a film, you're building a company, is that you've got to make sure that the content you're creating resonates with the audience you're creating it for. And I think, we see it's very easy for the work that I do for us to focus on what, like, the older white male donors would like to see. And I'll often get that question, why don't you just take a Kenneth Burns documentary and cut it into a bunch of pieces? Well, it doesn't work. That's not the way young people consume information. That's not the way they want information. And so, it really becomes, yeah, how do we do this? It's why we shoot for the 2 minutes. Because at the same time, as you were dealing with your daughter in kindergarten, my oldest had just started high school. And they were trying to use online content. But what you found them using is they were largely using college lectures done by college professors. This is world history. And it was essentially a 45-minute deck with the professor reading his PowerPoint.
Oh,
Nobody wants that.
no.
Instead, here you get a 2.5 minute video that's animated, but it's based on primary source material, so it's correct. But it's the type of information we want.
And who's dictating it? It makes me think about the concept of social proof, where, if someone who's a peer, someone who sounds like me or feels like they resonate with me and my struggles, if they're telling me the content, it means more than someone like, say, like some old professor who they doesn't speak the same language. Are you telling the story in a certain way?
We do. And I feel it two ways. I mean, one is, we rely on an incredible team that includes educators, includes subject matter experts, because we've got to make sure that everything is factually correct. We have to make sure that every element is correct for the time period, particularly when you're animating it. But what you're talking about is, one of the first things I learned in this process was just how important that narrator, that voiceover is.
Yeah.
And there, we spend a lot of time. We have a stable of individuals that we use. I mean, we can't use the same person for every film because people will get bored with it. But it's a matter of finding voices that relate directly to the user. So it's finding those voices that sound younger. It's finding those voices that sound diverse so that you're able to relate. And, when we first started this, I remember going through the process, what we needed to do was have this narrated by YouTube celebrities. And we didn't have to do that. It's, the way you described it is absolutely right. Is people, I think the learners hear themselves not just in the films themselves, but in the voices that are narrating them.
Yeah. The stickiness gets higher. And when you talk about history, how far back are we going? I mean, like, because history to me, I think sometimes we think it's a long time ago, but how long is it before we memorialize it when things are moving so fast in today's technology, different world?
It's interesting. I mean, what we do for most of our films, we're focusing on American history. So you're looking at colonial times up to modern. The challenges we have in our school systems, particularly our public school systems, is when you look at how history is taught. What ends up happening? We spend all of the fall talking about the foundations of America and the American Revolution. You come back after the holidays. You then start in essentially on the Civil War. You take a break for Black History Month. By April, you sort of gotten through the Civil War and maybe Reconstruction. And then it's time to take the state test. So you lose a couple weeks for that. And then you come back and essentially get to spend the second half of April and all of May learning industrial evolution, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and modern history. And so what we do is we make sure that we're looking at all of the time periods equally. And sometimes we work with partners. Like we've done a series with the New York Historical Society on the foundations of democracy. Well, that requires us to go history all the way back to the ancient Greeks.
Hmm.
But most of what we do focuses on U.S. history. We've got a new project that we're doing now with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, a number of other presidential libraries and museums, where we're producing 500 new films. The series is called Essentials. 500 new films that will be released, made available to the public for free on the website history.org, that are all going to be available as we celebrate our 250th anniversary in July of 2026.
Wow. Exciting. Is there any content around, I'll call it the energy crisis? I'm very passionate about the solar industry. And what's interesting is we started to see that in some places in middle America, there was some really negative press coming out from the utility companies, and targeted at our youngest citizens, right? And they had cartoons that were like, oh, see someone driving a bus, and that if we go solar, then there won't be a bus driver anymore. Or, if the fossil fuel, they had like a catchy name for the fossil fuel, guy and whatnot. And how, that's kind of one thing about more like modern concepts that matter. Like, when does that become history? Or is it too late by the time we start teaching kids that?
It's not too late. It's one of those. I mean, if we look at things like environmentalism, I mean, I can go back to some of our films we have. The namesake of our organization, we're named after Teddy Roosevelt. And so you can look at Teddy Roosevelt as a conservationist, where you're talking about more than a century ago. But we also have films on, why Earth Day was created,
Mm.
and what that meant. I think it's one of those we take for granted. We think that everybody knows modern history. But you have to realize, we're talking about individuals. If you look at the average high school senior right now, no, they weren't alive during 9/11. They don't remember what that means. They certainly weren't alive when the Challenger exploded. I remember that in middle school where they had us all watching it.
Wow.
You literally watched the space shuttle explode, and then you went to math class the next period.
Ah,
Uh, it's that sort of thing, and I think too often we think American history ends, if not after World War II, at least after Vietnam. And it becomes hard, I think, for young people to understand that. You hear so much about some of these reference points. You think about 9/11, for instance. It's going to be no different. I mean, 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to be talking the same way about things like January 6th. It's a little radioactive now. I talk to many teachers who are petrified. And this is going back to 5 years ago. We're petrified in terms of understanding how to teach something like January 6th. And, we don't take a political perspective. There are films. If you are a true blue progressive, there are films that you will love. There are films that you will loathe. If you are a red hat wearing conservative, the same is true. It's going to be different films that you like and loathe, but it's there.
mm.
You will find the full spectrum in there. And I think that's what's so important about history, is that it is inspiring, it is depressing, it is inspirational, it is loathsome, it is dark, it is sunny, it's contradictory. And so on things like January 6th, I mean, we've worked with educators. We've got films on the British burning the White House down during the War of 1812. We have films about the Puerto Rican nationalists opening fire, gunfire on the House of Representatives floor in the 1950s. There are ways to teach this that you can make a difference without worrying about how close do we tread to what is history versus what is reality.
I think that that's really nice to hear because I think that, it's even interesting just how much more sensitive I think we've all become, right, in the recent years. And it's kind of odd for me, being a marketer and a communicator, like that we're going backwards. Right? One of my favorite movies is the Zohan, which is an Adam Sandler movie, and I'm not usually a fan of his, but I love the Zohan, and it talks about the Middle Eastern and Jewish and Palestinians and some of their conflict, but it's all positive and funny. And I think that me and my mom were talking about it. I don't think that that movie could be made today.
Yeah.
And a lot of things like Sex in the City and these other kind of shows that when I was a child, they were just coming out and really kind of helped move the needle in terms of just showing the world the way it is.
It will. Yeah.
Now we're moving backwards and what's that going to do if it's nice that we can have these authentic voices and the truth being told and you know, that's still accessible.
You're right. It becomes so important. I mean, I'm of the age where, um, I was a huge Mel Brooks fan, and most of Mel Brooks's movies could never be made today. You look at the TV shows that I watched when I was a young child. You look at things like Good Times and All in the Family. You couldn't do that anymore,
Right.
and that becomes enormously important. I think that's why telling these stories from history is so essential because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that we are putting a spotlight on these things, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because when we decide that we don't want to talk about these things, when we decide that this is something that it's going to rub people the wrong way, we shouldn't discuss it. Or we try to whitewash history. We try to take down things and pretend that this part of our history didn't exist. We just do ourselves a huge disservice.
We do because that's the only way it's going to repeat itself, right? Wow. And then what kind of metrics are you using to show that this is working? I mean, we're looking at views. I mean, you said you have hundreds of pieces of content. What is the average look viewership?
We find, unlike when you look at things online and you see, you often will use metrics like websites and you'll look at how long are people on page and how long have they been on site. Is we find when somebody looks at our video, they watch the whole video. And so, our metrics tend to look at, just sort of the total users that have access to it. We're looking at the number of teachers who are using it. But, before we started this second phase of work, we did some pretty deep research in really understanding who's using it and how are they using it. The numbers there were far better than I ever would have expected. I think it's one of the I think we've always sold ourselves short when it comes to using media in the classroom. Again, my generation, you use media in the classroom when the teacher was sick and somebody decided they were going to wheel the AV cart in.
Right.
It's not the case anymore. And yeah, and I know we've got schools across the country and around the world for that matter that are looking at ways, how do we get kids to stop using their phones? How are we making them we take them away when they get to school, we put them in a bag so they can't get signal and those sorts of things. And I've written about this, I've spoken out about it. I think it's the wrong approach. I think, we've got students today are digital natives. It makes no sense to try to unplug and de-skill them. It becomes a matter of how do we use it in an effective way. And, it took me a while to come around on that, Anna. It's one of those, I was actually in Israel and was visiting charter schools in Israel years ago. And these were charter schools that served the Jewish community, they served the Muslim community, they served the Bedouin community. And when I got there, I was trying to figure out the technology. And they realized very smartly, because so many of their students were relatively low income, that not every student had a computer at home. Not every student had a tablet at home. Every student, though, had a phone.
Yep.
And they made sure to optimize content for that phone. And it's the same thinking that we used for Driving Force. Is every film that we've created, yeah, you can watch it on a big screen in a classroom if you want, but it's just as effective watching it in the palm of your hand.
Are there any like Q&As or any ways for engagement through the film? When you
There
watch
are. We've provided a lot of that background for teachers, because you also get the questions, not just in terms of the what can we ask, how do we build on this sort of thing, but you'll also get issues where they want to know what the primary sources were, what are the references, in case they do get pushback. We have all of that available for anybody who wants it, and we regularly do sessions with teachers to explain how to use that in an effective way.
have you, fed it into any AI and your
Not yet. That's the next step.
yeah,
That is the next step. It's one of those that as you know, I mean, AI is as good as the materials it can pull from.
that's right.
And so you always have that danger if you're running history through AI, that the AI is learning just as much from the false narratives as they do from anything else. And so one has to be careful, but that's it. That's the next stage. I think you see those schools that are really trying to figure it out are the ones that are empowering their students to use AI as long as they disclose they are using AI. Those that are telling them you can't use it, and we're going to run the checks to make sure. It's no different than when I was a kid and you had to learn how to do all of the long division and math in your hand because we were told when you're an adult you're never going to carry a calculator with you.
Right.
We were wrong there. We're wrong here. I mean, the same criticisms we have today for technology and AI and how they're going to overtake and everything. It's the exact same criticisms we had years ago for the computer. And to be honest, it's the exact same criticisms that society had when Gutenberg introduced movable type.
I think that you're right. And I think that another thing is when we look at AI and that, it can be, it's, as you said, it's only as good as what we give it. And as some of the large, creators, and I understand being a writer, I understand why, like, Forbes and others are not allowing the scraping because it's content that they're paying for. But this on the flip side of it is then it becomes so much easier for fakers or imposters, who have no validation on BuzzFeed and other places to really skew the real story. And that's what the AI is learning, and that's what it's gonna believe. And and I think that with stuff like that you have, it's like the Wikipedia of the future, like even Wikipedia, we don't necessarily always trust.
Although we seem to trust it a whole lot more than we used to, don't we?
W We do. I mean, it's like kinda like when you mentioned, going back in the day, and it made me think about going to the library and how much I actually enjoyed it. I really liked to go to the library and find that footnote and, the source and the reference. It was almost like a scavenger hunt. And now, with AI, it's like, I think that there's just more opportunities to even find better sources than before, right? It's not
It
that
is.
it doesn't mean that you're taking less time doing it. It might mean that you're just getting the right or more trusted data.
And I think it's all about perspective and it's all about generations. I mean, we can sit here and I hear plenty of people that will, lament the fact that newspapers are dying. The newspaper that I used to deliver as a kid, my first job in New Jersey, no longer exists. They closed down 2 weeks ago. But we also have to acknowledge that we have access to more information today as individuals than we ever had in the history of mankind. And it's all how we're going to consume it. And yes, I think we see today, with the exception of probably the generation over 75, most people, at least here in the United States, we don't get our news from newspapers, and we don't even get our news from the nightly news on the three flagship channels. It's not where we get our information anymore. When January 6th happened, my daughter knew about it because she learned about it from TikTok.
Oh, wow.
She wasn't watching CNN or Fox. She was watching TikTok, and TikTok taught her about it.
Well, hey, I mean, as long as it's the right information, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's also subject. I mean, people's memories we know change, and like how many different sides of the story are we actually telling? And you know, well, that's really interesting. So, what about your book? Do you see that as taking on some video life, and you're going to share this in some other different formats?
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of four books that I've written, and I've got a fifth that's midway through now. And it's the only one that I can say I sort of see the life after the life. And it's one of those I'm sort of reluctant to admit because I'm almost embarrassed about the process. But I do have it in screenplay form now. I have pitched unsuccessfully a couple of Hollywood studios. I've got another one that hasn't said no yet. Uh, but it becomes fascinating, when you go through a process like that, you figure out, okay, what happens next in the written word, right? And it is. And I think it's a great story to tell. And you go through these processes, and the first question you always get is, well, what's the comp? What story is this like?
Mm.
And I had given it so much thought, and I sat down with when you're pitching the Hollywood studios, and that you get like an 8-minute time slot to pitch your whole story. And I was ready for this question, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is. I said it's sort of a mix. It's Bring It On meets A League of Their Own meets something else. And one of these producers, she looked me in the eye. She said, "You're wrong." I said, "Okay." She said, "No." She said, "Your comp is Ted Lasso."
Oh, really?
And I was embarrassed because I
Oh,
I
I
was
love Ted Lasso. I think
I was late to the show. I knew what Ted Lasso was. I had never watched a minute of it.
oh, it's so funny.
I love it now.
Yeah.
It is now my North Star, if you will, in my life right now. And so I had to sit there and watch it. And I binge watched all the seasons like we all do now, right? And after it was over, I then all of a sudden it clicked with me what she saw in the story and why she made that connection.
Wow. Well, I mean, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm imagining too, and I think that that's pretty darn fun.
We all like the fish out of water story. We all like, and I think everybody loves a redemption story, and athletics is great for that because you always lose and then you try to win. We always, I think we enjoy seeing when things go against type.
Yep.
And I say that, we often hear such powerful stories of women who have gone into the professional workplace, and gone into communities that have had to face discrimination, have had to face people who just underestimated them, and they had to prove them wrong, who were, gonna persevere regardless of the odds. We don't often think of it in terms of somebody who looks like me. We've got a lot going for us to start in society. We got a couple head starts. And this made for a very different experience for me. And I think, yeah, that's part of what people find so interesting. I've been very, very proud of the number of people, not just who have read the book, but who have reached out after the fact, because it has touched them in some way. And it's always fun when somebody will send me a clip where they see something on YouTube, and it's, a father doing his daughter's cheer dance while she's down on the floor competing and he's up in the stands watching, and those sorts of things. And I would not trade the time I had with my daughter as her coach. I think I'm still in her cell phone. She still has me in her iPhone as Coach Daddy.
Aw.
That's what happens when I text or call her, but would never trade a moment of, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how much she and I were tested throughout the process, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Wow. That's beautiful. And what were your other be real quick, what were your other books about?
Sure. So my first book is one that looks at, it's a more of an academic book. It's written for parents, in helping them make sure that their children are being taught through science of reading in the classroom in the elementary schools. And that was the first book that I was involved in. I was one of the contributing authors and was the lead editor. I have another book called Dad Provement, which chronicles the years it took for my wife and I to adopt our two children. Both of our kids were born in Guatemala,
Wow.
going through the international adoption process with them, and very proud of that book. We have Dad in a Cheer Bow. And then for my history work, have actually did another book. It's called Why History Matters. It's a collection of essays from teachers across the country, on both why they think teaching history is so important, but how they make it come alive to their students. And now the fifth book that I'm working on now, which will be out by the end of the year, is more of a corporate book. It provides a primer for CEOs and executive leaders on how important successful strategic communications is, which is my background, and actually walks through all of the tools in their toolbox, but we do so through an MMA lens. So everything is as if it's mixed martial arts. Everything is quite frankly, as we see in corporate communications all the time. Everything is this form of combat.
Mm, indeed. So, what's one tip that you can give our listeners right now on how to improve your communication?
Sure. I think the most important thing when we think of communication, we often think about what we're going to say. And one thing I learned as a coach that I've used professionally, it becomes how important it is that we listen. That it's there's a practice that is often referred to as active listening,
Mhm.
and you and I can have the perfect conversation, and I can sit here, I can listen and take in every word that you're saying, or I can be sitting here thinking about what I'm going to say next, and we don't realize that how much we miss if all we're doing is thinking about what we're going to say next. For my work, I have to raise a lot of money. And you raise that money by essentially leveraging investments. You show people how an investment in your organization leverages what they're already funding. And that requires active listening. It's not selling a used car. It really is understanding. And I think, at the end of the day, and I'm not the first to say this. I mean, this originated with Dan Yankelovich and the folks at Public Agenda. But when we think of communications, if you don't live the life, you often think of it in terms of informing. My job is to push information out. And if I push enough of it out, then by God, something's got to stick with you, right?
Mhm.
And that's not what works. We know that successful communications is successful engagement, and that informing is only the first step. And what we know is if you really want to be good at it, you ultimately have to focus on building momentum for your ideas, and you have to focus on mobilizing audiences to put them into action. Successful communication, successful as engagement is about winning both hearts and minds. It's not just being the smartest person in the room. It's not just saying what people want to hear.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And actually, when I first started my podcast, I was not going to even have like any kind of Q&A at all, right? Because of that exact thing, the active listening. And if people are just memorizing what they're going to say and you're waiting to read a question, then that's not a way that real conversations happen. But some people were so uncomfortable that they were so fearful of that what was I going to ask and was it so now we do a Q&A and we always just tell people these are things we might talk about, we may not talk about them, maybe in this order, maybe not in this order at all. And as you may have seen, I changed all of our questions.
Well, it's one of the, I think honestly, I mean, you nailed it, and it's one of those things. In a previous life, I used to do crisis communications, and I used to do media training. And one of the hardest things, even for the most seasoned veteran executive, one of the hardest things for them to navigate is silence. And if you think about it, if you're talking to a reporter asks you a question, and it's something that you and your team have figured out. You're going to be asked this question. You come up with the perfect answer. You work it, you drill it, you memorize it, you practice it, you do everything you have to do. Question comes, exactly what you want, pitch right down the plate. You deliver your answer exactly as you rehearsed. You're feeling like $1,000,000. Hit it out of the park. And what happens? The reporter just sort of sits there in silence and looks at you. Our human nature is, I must not have answered the question then. We can't sit in silence. Instead, our natural reaction is, I've got to fill the space.
Mm.
And I keep talking. And, when you're working with someone, particularly if they're involved in a crisis or their organization's at risk, when they start filling that space because they didn't listen to themselves, they certainly didn't listen to the person asking the question. When they start filling that space, that's when communications disasters happen.
Yes, indeed. Yep. Short and to the point. I always say the same thing. Yeah. And if you don't like the question, don't answer it. Just repeat what you want to say. Right.
And people, like I said at the start of this, I mean, I started off in politics. And, people, I think many of us don't appreciate that point you just made, in that particularly if you're talking to a reporter, they can only report that which you said.
Yep.
So, yeah. So it's one thing to explain to people, never repeat the question, don't use their language. but even harder to say, just keep delivering your message. And I've worked with plenty of politicians in particular. They feel like idiots. They say, I've given the same answer to the last 8 questions. Why do you want me to keep doing that? And you'll say, because on the 10th question, it's finally going to stick.
Yep. And that soundbite will be exactly what we want it to be. Good. Awesome. Well, this has been really exciting. Thanks so much for being here, Patrick. And now it makes all so much sense to me, like your whole story of the, politics. No wonder you're so interested in history and communication. And so this has been a very interesting conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us, me and us, I guess, the greater us, the listeners.
No, I appreciate it, on. Appreciate you giving me the time. Appreciate your audience taking the time to listen to us. And thank you for what you do.
Well, appreciate that. So to learn more about Patrick, you can visit him online and definitely pick up a copy of this book and all of his books on Amazon. And when your next one comes out, I hope you come back and share more tips for how to karate chop your way through the corporate communication world. And um, to all my listeners, please join me next week as I interview another industry expert in tips to succeed on and offline. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.